right, so President Donald Trump has promised hell on earth if there isn't a hostage deal by the time he's sworn into office. Meanwhile, over at Dropsite News, we've gotten a statement from Hamas appealing directly to President Trump. I'm going to read some of that. They write, Hamas spokesperson says, quote, we believe we can reach an agreement immediately if Netanyahu and his government stop their stalling and obstructing the deal. We are ready to proceed with an agreement immediately that guarantees a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, the return of displaced people to their homes without restrictions, a serious prisoner exchange deal from both sides, and the immediate launch of a comprehensive relief and reconstruction process for Gaza. Therefore, we look forward to President Trump and his team exerting pressure on Netanyahu and his government to move forward with the deal before his inauguration. Now this comes just as there's news being reported by Reuters and others that when it comes to that post-reconstruction or post-deal reconstruction process, the UAE, which is a very, very close ally of Trump himself and the Trump family, has said that it would take a lead in kind of overseeing with the U.S. Security and reconstruction until a reformed Palestinian Authority could start taking control in Gaza. Now, what's interesting about this is several things. One, the U.S. having some role in security and reconstruction in Gaza suggests boots on the ground. Like how would the U.S. play a role in security, without boots on the ground? One possibility would be just financing it and sending enormous amounts of weapons and money so that the UAE can hire like Colombian mercenaries to patrol Gaza. So it remains to be seen what those details are. But what's also interesting is that the Gulf countries had been insisting that a pathway to statehood was essential for their involvement in a post-conflict reconstruction. If these reports are accurate, that would suggest that the UAE at least is backing off of that piece of the deal, as Saudi Arabia and Israel are continuing their talks towards normalization, where Saudi is insisting on some type of language, about a pathway to statehood being included, or there won't be normalization. When we were last speaking a couple weeks ago before the Christmas and New Year's break, there was a lot of talk that a deal was just moments away from being inked. Trump putting the January 20th deadline on it, to me, has always meant that Netanyahu will take every day that's available. It's January 8th. That's at least 12 days that he has a free hand to strike Gaza, and the airstrikes have heated up. They've expanded. They've been almost around the clock, according to people in Gaza. So I would not expect him to strike a deal a moment before he's absolutely forced to by Donald Trump. So, but let's play a little bit from Trump to get a flavor of how he's framing his approach to this.
And these are comments from his press conference yesterday that we played some clips earlier in the show on other things, but he was asked by everyone different questions and touched on Israel here.
Yes, here you go.
That all hell must be paid if they don't release the hostages.
You know what that means, don't you? Well, do I have to define it for you? Look, all hell will break out. If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Can you elaborate?
And it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is.
So there's some real gallows humor going on in Gaza, and we're going to talk to Ahmed Khan, who was in Gaza recently. He was telling me that when he was there, Trump made similar comments, all hell will break loose. And everyone universally that he spoke to is like, does he have any idea what's going on here? Like what would that look like? Like, and it goes from a rhetorical question to an actual question where it's like, wait a minute, what would hell on earth look like if it wasn't this, which is, starvation, rampant disease, it's cold at night, you're living in tents, your tents are flooding, and airstrikes are continuing relentlessly, like, and all the hospitals are shut down. Like what? So if that's the status quo, what's hell look like?
I think Hamas, in a strange way, has some leverage with Donald Trump in that respect because
they've taken hell off the table by already bringing it to Gaza.
There's that. There's also that Trump he wants to be the guy who looks like he secured a deal. And so if he has to get to a deal, that means he needs Hamas's cooperation. So does he want to escalate beyond what you just described, Ryan, and be the guy who was behind what he already described for Netanyahu, 6 months ago, as a public relations problem? Does he want to be overseeing that? Or does Hamas have, I guess, some real leverage in they want a deal and Trump wants a deal? He wants to be the guy who solved the problem, ended the conflict, and secured what he will say is peace. Whether it's lasting is dubious, but that does actually sort of give Hamas their position some leverage going into a Trump administration.
Yeah, and over at the Dropside News Twitter account, you can find a report from Israeli media that a May document that was approved by Netanyahu's cabinet describing the terms that they would agree to for a ceasefire was leaked to the Israeli media, and it's consistent effectively with what Hamas is asking for, and is consistent with what Israel is now expected to get from an upcoming ceasefire, if one really happens. And actually, I have this right here. So think about that. This is May. The hostages have been held since May. Many perhaps have died since then. To get nothing extra, to get an agreement that was already on the table last May, is such an extraordinary and fundamental failure when it comes to what the leader of a government's mission is, which is to protect their own people, their own citizens. If you're one of those hostage families, you're asking why. Like, why is it now January and we're about to ink a deal, potentially we're going to ink a deal that was available to us in May? Like, what did we achieve between May and January? And the answer can only be satisfaction of a lust for the complete and total destruction of Gaza as a habitable place. Because nothing else has improved from Israel's perspective, from the perspective of the hostages from May until January, unless I'm missing something.
So Trump, we may see something similar. If we see something like that in Israel, we may see something similar also in Ukraine, where there's a peace deal that's
a deal that was available in February, March 2022.
And
probably
I think
better actually than will be available now.
People will say that what really changed is the seriousness of the negotiations. You have this presidential transition in the United States, and that changes the positions and the leverage that the deal makers have. So that's the argument I'd expect to hear, but I think it's a valid point.
Before we leave, let's just comment a little bit on some of the Anthony Blinken has been making the rounds and doing some exit interviews. He spoke with the New York Times here. Let me play a little bit of that.
To what has become the defining crisis of this era, which is the conflict in Gaza. You came in thinking you could broker a historic agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And then Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th with the horrific results which we saw. And Israel's response has been extreme. The latest UN figures put the Palestinian death toll at 45,000. Over 90% of Gaza's population is now displaced. The population is starving. All hospitals have been destroyed. In November, a UN committee released a report that found Israel's warfare practices, quote, consistent with the characteristics of genocide. I know you don't agree with that estimation, but do you believe that Israel's actions have been consistent with the rules of war?
Let's step back for a second and think about where we were on October 6th, and then where we were on October 7th, and where we've been since then. You're right. On October 6th, we were very much pursuing normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And in fact, I was scheduled to go to Saudi Arabia and Israel on October 10th. Trip, obviously, that didn't happen because of the events of October 7th. But the purpose of that trip was to work on the Palestinian component of any normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, because we believed, and the Saudis also said it was usually important, to make sure that if there was going to be normalization, there was also a pathway toward a Palestinian state.
End it there for now, because a lot of it from there is just him, kind of humiliating himself by trying to present the world in a way that it just simply isn't. But that piece is interesting, because what it reveals is just how flawed the American strategy was, that to ignore the Palestinian piece of a Mideast peace deal. Notice that he's saying on October 10th, he's going to go to talk to Israel and Saudi Arabia about the Palestinian issue. Anybody who's like hearing that and isn't completely absorbed in the propaganda here would be like, wait a minute, you're going to talk to Israel and Saudi Arabia about the Palestinians? Like, what about the Palestinians? They're going to talk to them about the Palestinians? Like, are they going to be involved in this conversation about them at all? And if they were involved in a serious way, then it's very difficult to imagine there's an October 7th. Hamas was very clear that one of the motivations for October 7th was that they felt like they were being written off of the historical stage, that they were being sidelined by the United States in an effort to normalize to normalize relations with Israel, normalize and effectively normalize the occupation, and just keep the status quo in place indefinitely. And it was they described it as a version of a flip the table moment. And if that's the case, then that is a fundamental failure of the policy that was being carried out by all administrations, whether it's Biden, Trump, and everybody since Clinton, effectively, or actually maybe since Bush.
I mean, what you heard Blinken just responding to from the New York Times there was totally unspoken, but it was him like embracing the Trump policy, tripling down on the Abraham Accord Trump policy. I don't know that I agree that it's hard to imagine October 7th happening without the Abraham Accords, but I do agree that it's clearly pushed them to a flip the table moment. Doesn't in any way justify the flip the table moment, but I do agree that that's a component of it, and it makes me wonder, as many people are, whether Donald Trump,
right,
his
it wouldn't just be an
negotiators,
absence of the Abraham Accords. You'd have to have real, genuine peace talks going on that everybody believed were serious. And if those were happening, my argument would be, then there wouldn't have been an October 7th.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I mean, Hamas would have to be bought into them.
Yeah.
As the power in Gaza.
Yeah.
And that's an if that is impossible to conceive of, because the purpose of Israel helping to prop up Hamas in Gaza was that so those talks aren't happening.
I mean, the Hamas charter, which was changed from, obviously, to just talk about the Israel, like the foundational principle of Israel's existence. I think there's an ideological part there, an ideological component there that makes it, I think, likely that, an October 7th could happen sort of at any given moment until there's something. That's why peace talks are always so depressing, because
it's interesting how an organization like Hamas can get its hand forced. It wasn't because they never necessarily had a change of heart that they changed their charter in I think it was 2017 to embrace a two-state deal. Is that there was public pressure from Palestinians
That's a good point.
to move in that direction, which then led to the 2018 the Great March of Return, which was these nonviolent protests in Gaza that would march to the fence. Were organized by Gaza civil society, and initially had an arm's length at best relationship with Hamas. Hamas saw them as not helpful to their and not part of their ideological project. Hamas eventually, because they were so popular, had to come around for political reasons and kind of embrace them. Everybody knows how those ended. Is IDF troops outside of the fence shot something like 40,000 people, most unarmed people, almost all of them unarmed, and were shooting for legs, shooting people's legs for sport, as a UN report has laid out. And then with the collapse of that nonviolent movement, Hamas then has more political capital to organize toward a violent response.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is there does the Trump camp recognize that there's something serious when Hamas says that the Abraham Accords were a factor in sort of pushing them towards October 7th? Do they take that seriously? Do they believe that Hamas is sincere when they say that, or do they continue to think the Abraham Accords were this sort of triumph of U.S. policy to Israel? And the answer to that is they continue to think the Abraham Accords were just sort of an indisputed triumph. And that doesn't mean you can't recognize that there were, keeping Palestinians out of the loop had, downstream consequences. But it doesn't seem like there's recognition of that. And so it's actually just, I think it's really hard to predict the particulars of Trump's Israel policy in this next administration. We can predict, obviously, the broad swath of it is, like deep support. But what does it look like in practice? How does he influence negotiations? That, I think, is less easy to predict.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think it's reasonable that we might actually get a ceasefire deal right around the 19th or 20th. Whether it holds, I think, is a totally different question.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. It might be a deal on paper that Israel violates regularly. Like if you notice, like the Hezbollah Israel deal is getting very close to completely collapsing, but Israel has bombed Hezbollah dozens, scores, maybe hundreds of times since the quote-unquote ceasefire deal. So we'll see.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.